The real battles are taking place in Iraq, but on Thursday, a war of words broke out in Washington, just as President Bush called for unity after a decision to commit yet more troops to Iraq. The support appears to be crumbling beneath him.
Senators from both sides grilled his Secretary of State and Defense Secretary, some claiming they had not been told the truth, others deploring the president's decision. From Washington, Al Jazeera's Rob Reynolds sent us this report.
The Bush administration's big guns rolled out to the microphones Thursday morning, seeking to sell an escalation of the Iraq war to a battle-weary American people.
Whatever one's views on how we got to this point in Iraq, there is widespread agreement that failure there would be a calamity that would haunt our nation in the future.
First of all, this is not a reinvasion of Iraq.
Only the Iraqi.
President Bush himself headed south to a military base in Georgia, where he received a warm welcome and had lunch with the troops. But on Capitol Hill, the president's plan came under withering fire, and not only from Democrats, as Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice experienced firsthand.
This speech given last night by this president represents the most dangerous foreign policy blunder in this country since Vietnam.
I have not been told the truth. I have not been told the truth over and over again by administration witnesses, and the American people have not been told the truth.
I've gone along with the president on this, and I bought into his dream, and at this stage of the game, I don't think it's going to happen.
Rice, who earlier was caught off guard when an open microphone picked up comments expressing concern about putting too much pressure on the Iraqi government of Nouri al-Maliki, told Congress al-Maliki had been put on notice.
I think he knows that his government is, in a sense, on borrowed time, not just in terms of the American people, but in terms of the Iraqi people.
Are you confident?
I'm confident.
Such assurances were not enough for some Democrats who want to seize the reins of foreign policy and cut off funds for the war.
It is time to use the power of the purse to bring our troops out of Iraq.
Bush and his deputies will continue to make their case both in the U.S. and abroad. But here in Washington on Thursday, you could almost feel the last vestiges of support for the president's plan evaporating like steam on a cold winter day.
Well, that was Rob Reynolds earlier. Let's cross to Rob now in Washington. When we talked last time, Rob, we found out what President Bush is going to do. We've heard a little in your report of what people are saying today on Capitol Hill. What else have they been saying?
Well, Stephen, more and more it looks as if the only minds that President Bush changed, if he changed any, were the minds of people who previously had supported him before this speech. So you have, as in the report, a senator like George Voinovich, who is a member of President Bush's own party, the Republican Party, saying he once supported President Bush's vision of a reformed Middle East and democracy and victory in Iraq, now saying he doesn't believe in it anymore. You had Norm Coleman, he's a moderate Republican senator from the state of Minnesota, asking Condoleezza Rice repeatedly today, what is the point of sending more American troops to die in Iraq? And you have the people themselves increasingly firmly against this new strategy, this escalation strategy by President Bush. There was a new poll that was conducted after the president spoke last night by on behalf of the Washington Post newspaper, and it showed that 61% of people who were polled oppose the idea of sending new troops. And another figure from that poll, only 34% approve of President Bush's handling of the war. So President Bush has got a lot of selling to do if he is going to try to get the American people behind it, and it just does not look like that's in the cards at this point.
What's President Bush been doing today then?
Well, he went down to Fort Benning, Georgia. That is, you know, in a very conservative part of the United States, and he was welcomed politely by the troops there. He had lunch with about 300 soldiers and some of their families. They also met with some people, family members of service members who had died in Iraq or Afghanistan. The troops at Fort Benning have already been rotated into Iraq twice. Under the president's plan, they will be sent to Iraq for a third tour of duty which will take place more quickly, speeded up, if you will, from what had previously been scheduled. 34 of the troops who were sent on the last tour of duty didn't make it home alive, Stephen.
Rob Reynolds in Washington. Thank you, Rob.
Well, President Bush's new plan has received a mixed reaction in Iraq. Most people don't believe that an increase in U.S. troops can help bring peace to their neighborhoods. But
others believe the presence of more soldiers might actually be comforting. Our Iraq correspondent, Hoda Abdulhamid, sent us this report from Baghdad.
The situation in Iraq is unacceptable to the American people.
A policy spelled out miles away, having a direct effect on the lives of Baghdad's residents. And from Iraq, a swift endorsement by one of the most senior Shiite clerics. Speaking from the holy city of Najaf, Abdulaziz al-Hakim reiterated his support to Prime Minister Maliki's plan, drawn in close consultation with Washington.
We fully support the government in its efforts to build up the state of institutions and the state of law for proceeding with the implementation of its plans aimed at keeping order, security and stability at the forefront of the new Baghdad security plan.
The plan, as presented to Iraqis, is to fight terrorism and any civilian carrying a gun. An all-out effort to give hope to the residents of the capital with the support of the Iraqi media. But residents here have seen several plans before, all failed, turning a once mixed capital into a series of sectarian enclaves.
So many plans were put into effect, but in vain. Let President George Bush leave the country and everything will be okay. 4 years have elapsed and Iraq has been destroyed. From time to time they make a new plan.
The idea of seeing more troops on their street is worrying many here. Most don't believe that an increase in American troops can help pacify their neighborhoods. Meanwhile, the violence continues. A bus carrying Shiite pilgrims returning from Saudi Arabia was attacked by gunmen. More bloodshed in a country in desperate need of security and reconciliation. Hoda Abdulhamid, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
To Afghanistan now, and NATO forces say they've killed up to 150 Taliban fighters in a battle in the east of the country. NATO says it attacked the fighters with ground fire and airstrikes as they crossed the border from Pakistan into Paktika province. The exact number of casualties, fatalities, is under dispute. Afghan defense officials say up to 80 fighters were killed. The Taliban has rejected NATO claims and says no fighters died.
Bangladesh's caretaker president Judin Ahmed has stepped down just hours after declaring a state of emergency and curfews across the country. Rumours of election scams have triggered weeks of violent protests and left more than 40 people dead. The United Nations says the political crisis has severely jeopardized the legitimacy of the upcoming elections.
The United States has officially confirmed its troops are on the ground in Somalia for the first time since their hurried exit 13 years ago. News of the US president came at the end of 3 days of air raids aimed at suspected Al-Qaeda members.
Washington says some, but not all of their intended top targets have been killed. John Terrett has more.
Warplanes on duty in the Indian Ocean earlier this week. Their target, suspected Al-Qaeda members operating in southern Somalia. Now, a senior US official says the strikes killed 10 suspected Al-Qaeda operatives, but missed 3 key figures, and the hunt is on to find them. The Pentagon's refused to say whether raids like these have been carried out since the beginning of the week, but it has admitted a US Special Operations Force is in Somalia, advising Ethiopian and Somali forces on the ground. In another development on Thursday, Somali warlords began handing in their weapons. Before the Union of Islamic Courts, Somalia was ruled by warlords, powerful men leading tribes that exerted huge influence over various parts of the East African nation. Now the UIC's been ousted with the help of the Ethiopians and the interim government installed in the capital Mogadishu, the warlords are suddenly back on the political radar.
Warlords lost their military power during the war with the Islamic courts, lost their credibility, and they are no longer getting American support anymore. They can't be a threat to us now. They have to stop being troublemakers as they have always been and start helping in rebuilding Somalia.
No one wants to see the warlords rule Somalia through individual fiefdoms as they did from 1991 and until the courts took over last year. Support from the USA, which needed them to prevent a much-feared UIC-led Islamic takeover of Somalia, is waning.